considered to be loners. And that's true in many instances, especially for adult males. They tend to not, be as playful as other classes of bears. But at Brooks River, especially when we have a lot of food available, we see the bears interacting and playing with one another quite a bit. So they have a lot. Neither of these families are really competing over space in this spot. It's more or less, again, just maybe one family or both families trying to assert themselves over the other, and not in a highly aggressive way either. Now you can see that both of these families are showing quite a bit of restraint. They don't want an all-out brawl. They don't want to risk injury if they don't have to. And there's not a preferred fishing spot in that area. So they just happen to come together, same place at the same time. And these interactions, these things are really, really fun to watch on the bear cams. And it's one of the unique things that you can see on the cameras that is more difficult to see in other national parks. If you go to Yellowstone, for instance, or Denali looking for grizzly bears, you may just see grizzly bears off in a distance, and usually they're alone. You don't have the opportunity to see them interacting with other bears very often. Those ecosystems are much more food limited. Bears show less tolerance towards one another because of that reason. But here at Brooks River, we have this very, very high concentration of bears, and we get to see them interacting quite frequently with one another. And our activity actually along the river right now is picking up. There's activity, that we're watching at the river mouth right now. We'll try to come back to this. I'm going to keep an eye out for on this situation here at the mouth of the river with these two families just kind of eyeballing each other. We're going to head back up to the falls for a minute because I do want to talk about one of the bears that I really enjoy watching because he's a real giant. We haven't really seen him at the falls very much over the past few days or week or so, really. He's actually been courting a female for much of the past week, but he's seems to be done with that right now, and he's back up at the falls. This is a bear 747. And you may be wondering, well, Mike, how do you identify this bear just looking at the back of his head? Well, I recognize him. I saw him walk into the waterfall, so I got a better look when he was doing that. But 747 also has short, sort of peg-like ears. They're wide set on his head. He has a very blocky muzzle. He also has some scars and wounds around his face and neck, but he's a massive bear. One of the ways that I recognize him is that just because he's so big. This is a photo I took of him in June of last year, believe it or not. And he's even bigger this year. So short, blocky muzzle, peg-like ears, massive bear overall. When people talk about big brown bears on the Alaska Peninsula or on Kodiak Island, 747 ranks up there among the largest of the adult males. So he's a giant of a bear. And a really skilled angler, you don't get as big as him without, I went to the wrong scene here. You don't get as big as 747 without being very skillful at fishing. He loves fishing in the jacuzzi. He'll fish in near the boulders on the far side of the falls. Adult males, really, really thick neck. That's one of the ways that you can often tell them apart from adult females. Full-grown adult females can be well filled in and very fat at times, but especially at this time of the year, they don't have like the girth around their neck. So really thick neck. Look for scars and wounds around the face area. That's common on adult males, less common on adult females. You can see how easily 747 grabbed that fish. In the jacuzzi, he's really just waiting for fish to bump into him. You can't really see the fish in the water very well just because of all of the bubbles. This is what it happens to look like from 747's perspective. This is a picture I took of the foamy water at the jacuzzi. But he's really just looking for fish to bump into him and using his quick reflexes to try and catch those salmon. down at the river mouth, we still have our families interacting with one another. Now that I've got, some more time to kind of watch them out of the corner of my eye, it looks like we have, 719 and her two yearlings, and then also looks like perhaps 273 and her three yearlings. And they're still, kind of at it. The playful cubs, curious cubs, bold cubs, 719 and her two on the right-hand side, 273 and her three yearlings. All of these cubs are yearlings, second-year cubs. You can see one of 273's cubs approaching 719's family quite closely. These are all bears that were raised here at Brooks River. 273, we don't know everything about her life history, but she is a bear that's very familiar with Brooks River and shows a high tolerance for the presence of people in the vicinity. So we suspect that she was raised as a cub in this area. 719 definitely was raised as a cub in this area. Her mother was 435 Holly, and Holly's back this year with a single spring cub. You can see 719's family not quite sure what to do about that really bold subadult, that bold yearling from 273's family, and now that yearling's moving back. Bears, they live in a world of threat and bluff. Even yearlings, they don't want to show weakness if they can avoid it. And it really does look like the yearlings here are leading the charge in this interaction. Being very curious and playful towards one another, 719 following. So one of those yearlings from 273's family approaching 719's family right in front of the park's large landing craft, nicknamed the Q. Its full name is Kittiwake. And if we run out of bear things to talk about, I'll definitely explain the meaning of that name. It has actually a fascinating story. And it's not common that we see the cubs from different litters playing with one another, but it certainly can happen at Brooks River. It really seems to depend on the tolerance level of the mothers, and sometimes their absent-mindedness almost. If they are very comfortable, with where their cub is, and they don't see any safety concerns, then they may let that cub engage with another family. But the cub from one family looking to play with bears from another family does have to be very careful, because again, the mother can be defensive and could seriously injure a strange an offspring of a strange family. You can see that 719's cubs sort of retreat to their mother. And now as soon as that other yearling turns its back on them, then they pursue. And so when they're pursuing a bear, a direct approach, that's trying to take charge of the situation, trying to show dominance. You can see that the yearlings recognize, there we go again, that mother has their back. So that's like their safety zone. Hey, if things get too wild for me, a little bit too rough, then I'm just going to go back to mom. 719 is paying attention to the situation, but you can look at 273 lying down over there. So she's not super concerned about what's going on between these families. These are these really fun interactions to take a look at. And I'm not sure how long this is going to go on, but it seems like the same scenario is playing out each and every time. That bold yearling from 273's moves towards 719's yearlings. 719's yearlings retreat to their mother. And then the bold yearling gets a little too close and decides to turn away. And then the yearlings from 719 decide to approach. (719) is a very interesting study for a mother bear. She actually is playful towards other young adults that she is familiar with. And that's something that's very uncommon for mother bears. Usually mother bears will play with their cubs, but they don't really engage with other independent bears. 719 has done that a few times over the past couple of years, and she's a young mother. This is her first litter. So she seems to be walking a line between kind of two different worlds. The one where she was single and independent, had a lot of food available to her, and she only had to worry about herself. So she was playful and energetic and willing to engage a lot of younger bears in some friendly interactions. And now as an adult, it seems like maybe sometimes she wants to do that, but she has her cubs to worry about. So very often her maternal instincts will win out in those situations when those two maybe feelings or thoughts conflict in her mind. But right now she seems content to let her one yearling interact with 273's cub. And again, once again, 719's cub retreats right back to the safety of mother. You can see that the other yearling isn't quite willing to get too close. Now we have the whole family moving in that direction. So I'll stick with this for just a little bit longer before I want to go back up to the falls. Maybe talk about some of the activity that's happening there. The 273 still quite comfortable in this whole situation, lying down, looking, relaxing. Bears are very smart animals. They certainly recognize each other. Across days and seasons, they recognize each other across years. Their sense of smell is quite incredible. So I'm sure they recognize each other not only by sight, but by smell. And they learn very quickly which bears are more tolerant of each other, which bears are defensive, which bears are dangerous, and which ones to stay away from. A lot of that is instinct. A lot of it comes with experience and interacting with other bears. And most of the bears that we see along the river, like these families here, come back year after year. 719, again, raised as a cub along the river. 273, probably raised as a cub along the river. And that could be the case with our bears that are still fishing Upper Brooks Falls, Otis and 747. Otis, again, in the far pool, 747 in the jacuzzi. Although we don't know for sure, we don't have really great records for when these bears would have been cubs, but it's quite likely that that they could have been raised in this area and came back as older subadults or young adults. And we haven't taken a look at our Riverwatch camera this whole time. Again, there's so much activity going on that it's hard for me to talk about everything at once. But we're going to look at another play interaction here. And while we were looking at the family groups, there was a bit of defensiveness and dominance going on there. But these two bears here look to be engaged in more of a playful interaction. Actually, one is trying to take a fish off of another, or at least beg some scraps there. Salmon are super abundant in this area. We're looking just upstream of the bridge. So when we were looking at the family before, we were looking downstream towards the river mouth. Now we're looking upstream from the bridge. This is usually something that we see quite often in September after the salmon begin to spawn and they die in the river. The lower river area, incredible salmon run. And it really underscores how healthy and productive this ecosystem is at the moment. And of course, the productivity of this ecosystem, the health of it overall, the wonderful scene that we're looking at right now with all of the bears, you know, this scene is not guaranteed for the future. So we do need to work to ensure that these ecosystems remain protected, that the oceans that the salmon rely on to grow big before they come back to spawn, the oceans remain healthy. We're seeing a lot of salmon throughout the North Pacific being very heavily impacted by the combined impacts of development and their spawning areas, human development, dams, warm water temperatures associated with climate change, and then also ocean acidification that's disrupting food webs. Now, those impacts haven't hit Katmai yet, but they certainly could. We have to make sure that we're protecting these ecosystems as best we can and acting to mitigate the changes that we know will come in the future if we don't step up and curb our carbon emissions. I'm going to cut back to this family group over here because they're still interacting with each other. 719 actually, right before I cut over, charged, gave one of the 273's yearlings on the left there a pretty good charge, but kind of held up. And that's often what happens when bears charge one another. Almost always it's a bluff. It's they only want to get the message across that you need to stay away. Even though, you know, bears possess the tools to cause a lot of great physical harm towards one another, again, they show quite a bit of restraint when interacting with one another. It's not to their advantage to war with one another all the time, and I think that's why we end up seeing them being, you know, or showing so much restraint when they do happen to interact. If you're tuning in late to the broadcast, I'm going to be here with you for another 15 minutes. My name is Mike Fitz, the resident naturalist with Explore.org. I'm also a former park ranger at Katmai National Park in Alaska, and that's where we're looking at right now. This is a play-by-play style broadcast where I get to narrate the bear and salmon activity, talk about what I'm seeing live on camera. These two families at the mouth of the river continuing to engage with one another. (719) and the mother bear that's sitting sort of in front of that large boat. Doesn't seem like she's really willing to engage very much, but you know, she's got to kind of look out for her yearling, and you can see her yearling continuing to move towards that family. The 273's family out of our line of sight right now, but just based on the movements of 719 and her crew, I suspect that other family is still very close by. And I know our camera operator is looking to follow this group as they continue to move on. We might get a glimpse here of the other, there they are, the other family still on the edge of the river. Two 273's family has 3 yearling cubs. You know, when they all get mixed up like this, it can be a little hard to tell them all apart. If either one of these mothers down here really wanted to end the situation, they probably could. They could show a lot of defensiveness. They could call to their cubs through huffing or woofing and relay the message, hey, it's time to depart. And now both mothers are in fairly close proximity here. But I'd actually be surprised if we saw any physical contact, certainly between the mothers. Now, while these families continue to not quite do a great job of social distancing for bears, go back up to the falls for just a minute. I think we'll come back down to the families later on before our broadcast ends here. 747 has been moving from one spot to another and being successful in many different spots. Otis in the far pool being successful this whole entire time. .747 with another catch. He's gotten several fish since he arrived about 10 or 15 minutes ago, and then he just dropped that fish. Occasionally, people wonder, rangers and biologists have speculated whether when a bear catches a fish and drops it, whether it recognizes that that fish is maybe a male and doesn't contain the valuable eggs that are nothing but fish oil, so really, really high in calories, those fish eggs. I'm not sure. It's hard to say, without being able to go into the river and grab the fish that 747 dropped and cutting its belly open and seeing whether it was male or female, where I don't think we'll ever really know the answer to that question. It's possible that a bear might be able to feel or smell whether or not it's a male or female. Their sense of smell is orders of magnitude greater than our own. So they really do live in a world of odor that we can scarcely imagine. A great analogy that I came across recently is regarding their sense of smell is for a bear, it's like they're never alone. Like they always know where their neighbors are at just because they can smell them. They can smell where their neighbors were on the footpaths that they share, on the marking trees that they rub on, the urine trails and the scat that they leave behind. It would be like if I could smell, my neighbors a quarter mile or more down the road or farther. So a very different sort of lived experience for bears compared to our own. Now down at the river mouth, 273 showing a little bit more defensiveness there towards 719, but 719 has not backed down, not made the effort to really move away. And again, these are mostly, I think a lot of this interaction is just being precipitated by the cubs and the mothers really not being able to convey the message that maybe, hey, you want to keep your distance from this other family. They could be potentially dangerous. But they're also not getting the full signals that suggest, hey, this is a very dangerous situation. If you were to see 747, for example, walk through this area, you probably would see these families scatter in different directions, not even try to get close to 747 or allow 747 to get close to them. Now, it does look like there's something that's interesting. 273's family on that boat. We saw 719's family there earlier. Again, bears are very, very curious. If this boat was used to fish, for example, and there's a little bit of fish slime left on the bow of the boat, for instance, or on a rope or something like that, then very easily that can attract the bear's attention. If there's anything left in it, like a life preserver, any other equipment, maybe a little bit of spilled gasoline, that attracts the attention of bears as well. It really does take a village, the small village of Brooks Camp, and everyone who visits to make sure that the bears are not finding those attractants. Any little bit of, especially odor that's associated with food, is going to pull them in a certain direction. And maybe that's not the direction that you want. So 719 hiding in the grass there, 273 and her family sitting on the other side of that boat. We have another bear upstream of the bridge. So let's cut to them right now, get a different perspective on the river. This area right here actually used to have an old trail that traversed it as recently as last year. And with the construction of the elevated bridge over Brooks River, that trail, became obsolete, and it was actually obsolete and not useful for several years. But last fall sometime, during some high water conditions, that area washed away, and this is quickly becoming the main river channel. In September, I think we're gonna see a lot of bears utilizing this area as well. So pay attention to the River Watch camera in late summer, because I think you'll be able to see a lot of bears scavenging fish in this area, like this one is doing right now. Each one of these sockeye at this time of the year contains about 4,500 calories. So that's a lot of digestible calories for a brown bear. A young independent bear can easily meet its his daily energy needs just by eating a fish a day. Everything else after that just allows them to gain extra body mass, the body mass they need to survive hibernation. Come September, these fish will be less valuable from an energetic standpoint, but they'll also be very easy to catch because there will be many dead and dying fish in the bottom of the river. For salmon, this is a one-way journey for them. Once they re-enter fresh water, they don't return to the sea. So they devote all of their energy, all of their resources into migrating and spawning. But if you're a bear, it is worthwhile to catch the freshest fish that you can, because that's going to give you the greatest energetic reward. And not only have we been